Hello everyone, my name's Leonie. Welcome to another video. You know what? To be fully honest with you, I've been really stressed lately. I'm moving in a week and the brain isn't quite braining anymore for me. I've been in a huge reading slump. I've just been having a really hard time sitting down and focusing on a book, and instead I just go scroll TikTok or Instagram for hours, which I know it's not good, but I currently just don't really have the capacity to not do the things that I know are bad for me. Despite that, I have read some really great books lately, and I do have 5 books to talk to you guys about. So I thought for this video, I'm just gonna do like a regular wrap-up books I recently read. It's not much, but we're gonna do a chill style, okay? Let's just imagine this is a little bookish sleepover and I'm telling you about the books that I recently read while we have a little cup of tea. Oh, I have chocolate. Oh, I absolutely love the Leonie of yesterday who decided to buy chocolate at the supermarket. Yeah! Oh, it's kind of melted because it's really hot. Also, I want you to know that this is probably... Oh my god. Oh, that's actually crazy. Yeah, well, this is probably the last time you're gonna see this setup. Oh. Oh, it's actually making me very sentimental. Yeah, this is probably the last time you're gonna see me film in this setup on this couch. And the next time I'm filming a video, I will be in my new apartment and I don't even know what the setup is gonna look like yet there. That's a mystery to both me and you. So the first book that I finished since I last did a wrap-up, I have actually already talked to this in plenty of videos, but I just like to have an overview of all the books I read in these kind of wrap-ups, is Song for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers. This is what I call cozy sci-fi. It is a sci-fi story. It's really short, it's only a novella, about a world in which robots exist, and they do go through some kind of robot revolution, but not in the scary robots bad kind of way that you're used to in sci-fi. Instead, the robots go through this revolution where they all gain consciousness, and suddenly they're like, we don't want to live in this world anymore, we don't want to live in human society, we're gonna go off to the woods and just disappear in nature. And the humans were like, okay, we respect your wishes, you can go out into nature and we won't bother you anymore. That is the world building in this sci-fi book. And honestly, that kind of wholesomeness, that kind of positive outlook on humanity and the technology that humanity creates really sets the tone to what kind of story this is. I've had someone describe this book to me as a gentle kiss on the forehead, and that perfectly describes the feeling that this gives you. It is basically about a tea monk who goes out to travel the world and give people advice and tea, and then they meet a robot out in the wilderness and they have a ton of conversations together. So most of the book is just conversations between this tea monk and this robot, and they both have very different ideas on what is the meaning of life? Like, what is your purpose in life? Should you have a purpose in life? What are humans built for? Are humans built for anything? It's one of those books where you're going to be underlining a lot of things because there's just so many really nice conversations. If you grew up watching After Last Airbender and you really love Uncle Iroh and his tea making and also the advice that he gives, you're gonna love this book because this book kind of has that vibe. I honestly feel like this book was written by Uncle Iroh, Becky Chambers. I know who you are. One that really stuck with me that I outlined a lot was at some point Dex, the tea monk, start talking about the importance of fear. How fear is also a necessary thing to keep us from harm. I mean, when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. It can feel like fear is something that harms us, but if we didn't have fear, we would like go out and jump into a canyon just to see what that feels like. We would go out into scary woods and get eaten by wolves. So fear is actually this necessary part of life that keeps us alive, which now that I'm saying it sounds like duh, yeah, of course, but I just really like that they talk about this in a way that kind of frames fear as something that we shouldn't hate and that we should embrace. Like, obviously you shouldn't have too much of it, but it kind of changed my perspective on my own fear, kind of started seeing it with a little bit more benevolence, like not hating it so much, seeing it as something that keeps me safe, although a little bit too much sometimes. I still want to read the sequel, but if you have any other recommendations for books that kind of discuss interesting philosophical topics, like the characters go over these kind of topics without being really dark or heavy or sad, but with a more like wholesome outlook, I would love that. I think it's a subgenre of sci-fi that is also called hope punk. Then I read the ebook for This Is How You Lose the Time War. I feel like people have been recommending this book to me for a very, very long time, and I kept just ignoring it because I thought this was going to be like really, really confusing sci-fi, which I mean it is, but not in the way you think. When I hear people talk about this, I heard them talking about this in the way of like, it's super poetic, it's like literary sci-fi about this grand love story with this like time traveling war. And honestly, when I heard all those words, I was like, ooh, I don't think I'm gonna enjoy that. I'm not gonna touch that. I'm not gonna touch that. And then I read it because my patrons picked this as our book club for the month. And although I will say that yes, it is confusing sci-fi and there is a lot of confusing time travel and the writing style is very poetic and lyrical, I really liked those aspects and I actually really loved this book. I thought it was absolutely beautiful and I cried. So in this book we follow two enemies, basically two agents of enemy agencies that are in this war with each other that spans across timelines. It's more like multiple dimensions, you know, so like multiple dimensions with different timelines, alternate realities if you will, and these time agents are basically trying to win from each other by constantly going back and forth between different alternate timelines and changing like little things that would help their faction win in the future in a kind of butterfly effect type of way. It kind of reminds me of Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. A tip that I will give you if you're going to read this is to just know that every chapter it's in a different timeline. So every chapter you're gonna get new world building of this new timeline that they're in, but it's okay if you don't fully understand it. You don't have to remember all of the details because they're gonna be in a different timeline in the next chapter anyway. With the first few chapters I was like, oh my god, there's so much world building, I need to remember all these names, I need to understand the structure of this world right there, and you don't. Like, you don't, because you're gonna be going to somewhere else in the other chapter anyway. So that is my biggest tip to kind of stop you from being overwhelmed with confusion when you start reading this. I haven't even told you what this book's about yet. What this book actually is about is these two enemies fighting each other across different timelines, but they also start writing each other letters because they constantly almost get in contact with each other, but like just not, you know, they're like lines that like almost cross and then they go somewhere else, and they start writing these letters to each other, and the letters just become progressively like more romantic. Like, it starts out as this wonderful enemies to lovers thing. Wait, I need to share a quote that I really loved. You know, when they're finding out where the other is situated, they'll say things to each other like, oh, it flatters me to find that you're so attentive. And then we'd be at each other's throats even more. Oh, Petal, you say it like that's a bad thing. Yeah. But then it gets like really romantic very, very quickly. And when I say romantic, I mean things like taking an entire lifetime to write a letter to your enemy by etching the words into the rings of a growing tree over dozens of years, just so that your enemy can read that letter in the rings of this tree in 100 years. Gosh, that's a level of dedication. That is love. If you have that level of dedication to your enemy, that is love. It is a little bit confusing. It is very, very lyrical and poetically written. So if those sound like things that you're not really gonna be into, I would stay away from this, but I thought this was beautiful. And again, another one of those more hopeful sci-fi stories. Oh no, the chocolate is doing that thing where I get the urge to just eat the entire bar in one go. Next, I listened to an audiobook by Olivia Laing called Crudo. This is another novella. What is this about? This is one of those books where it genuinely took me about half of the book to figure out what the plot was going to be. So it is a piece of literary fiction where we follow Kathy, who is this very rich woman living her very rich life, eating oysters, going on holidays to the Hamptons with her other rich and unworld savvy friends. And it's just one of those like literary fiction books where you just kind of read about their life and the absurdity of it. But I would say the plot of this book is that you kind of see Kathy's growing disillusionment with this lifestyle set to a background of a changing world with the Trump presidency and climate change and the uprise of right-wing fascism. It's a very stream of conscious portrait of this middle-aged woman in a changing modern world. This book made me feel kind of mixed. There are parts that I really liked, especially the more kind of poignant cultural commentary parts. But then there are also big parts where I just didn't really care about what was happening or what the main character had to say, maybe because it was so stream of consciousness. So it really made me realize that the author, Olivia Laing, is probably really good at writing actual essays that are rooted in reality, and I know that her other books, or at least The Garden Against Time, is non-fiction. So I think I want to try out her non-fiction work. I would still give it like 3 stars, but I think I would like her other books more. Oh, that's really good tea. Oh, I really think I made that green tea at the perfect temperature. Because usually when I make green tea, I'm too impatient and I just get the freshly boiled water, even though I know it burns the green tea, but I'm impatient. But I think I made it perfectly and it tastes amazing. Next book I finished is a book that I've been reading for like over a month. But you know how sometimes when you read a book for a very, very long time, it's not necessarily a bad sign. It's just that, you know, you want to kind of sink into that book and sit with that book for a very long time. For me, that happened with Rouge by Mona Awad. Wow, perfectly fits the color scheme. So you may be aware that Mona Awad is the author of one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Bunny, and this is her most recent release. It is a modern retelling of Snow White that is about the beauty industry, the toxicity of beauty standards, and it's about this like spa cult, like this really weird skincare spa cult, and our main character kind of gets sucked into this cult as well because, you know, she wants to have that beautiful skincare glow. This book is just like a little weird. A little very weird. Like, it starts out just slightly over the top in the sense that our main character like falls asleep watching skincare videos because it just calms her down so much to watch someone talk about the 24 karat gold snail mucus face mask that she puts on. And then slowly things just get weirder where she gets into this cult and there are like weird jellyfish floating around. At some point Tom Cruise starts showing up and you're just like, why is Tom Cruise here? And then you start realizing that it's like a metaphor. But at first you're like, what's going on? That's like what I love about Mona Awad, is that for a very long time you're like, what is this? And then it clicks and you're like, oh, it's a clever thing. It's a clever thing. I love any story that just criticizes not only the beauty industry and like insane beauty standards and how women aren't allowed to age at all and the colorism of it all, but also how these kind of beauty standards can be passed down from mother to daughter, and how these ideals kind of get basically passed on women to women, even though we're just hurting each other more. But what I really like about Mona Awad is that she's really good at critiquing these things that we do as women to each other. Like in Bunny, she also does this a lot. Like the entire book is just about the toxicity that can exist between women, and here that also happens with like beauty standards. But she's always empathetic towards her evil female villainous characters, and in the end it is always a man that is like the real enemy and the reason that these women are doing all these bad things to each other. I just like the way Mona Awad looks at the world. I wish she had a podcast. I would love to listen to her takes on anything that happens in the culture, to be honest. You know, actually what the worst thing was, when I started reading this book and it talks about all the like skincare things that the main character does to keep her skin pretty and young and acne free, for like a little moment there I was like, oh, I need to pick up my skincare routine. Like if I just do a little bit more research on skincare a little bit, because I had a time where I completely fell into like a skincare research hole on YouTube, as I think many of you also have. And I was like, oh, I should pick that up again and get really into skincare and make my skin prettier. And then I was like, no, wait. That is like not the point of this book. That was not the point of this book. I gave this like 4 stars. It's not a 5 stars. I did not like it nearly as much as Bunny, and I think the main reason for that is because I did think the metaphors in here are extremely heavy-handed. You know, there's like a lot of metaphors with dolls and mannequins and mirrors, and it's all very on the nose in my opinion, so that I liked a little bit less. I prefer it when the messages are a little bit more hidden. But then on other moments, the messages were so hidden that I was like, I don't really understand what you're trying to say here. Why is there a man called Hud Hudson? But I do recommend this book to anyone who likes Mona Awad and anyone who likes a little bit of weird surrealistic stories, and especially anyone who likes to think about how women are being scammed by the beauty industry. And last but not least, a few months ago I started my like bi-yearly kind of reread of The Tao of Pooh. I talked about this book a lot. It's one of my favorites. It is a book that explains Taoism using Winnie the Pooh. It's really simple, it's really short, but I like to reread it every few years because every single time I get something new out of it, and there are new messages that kind of stick with me the most, or are exactly what I need to hear at that point in my life. So I thought for this review I would just kind of go over the things that really stuck with me this time. This time it really was the idea of respecting inner nature that stuck with me. I liked it so much that I even wrote it down in my art journal. Let me get that. But basically it talks about how in Taoism there's this concept of inner nature. Everything has an inner nature. Everyone, every animal, every plant has an inner nature of what it is supposed to be and what it is supposed to do. And if you live according to that inner nature, you will, you know, reach great things. And if you live trying to go against your inner nature, the way lots of people do, that is when things go wrong. It is kind of like the standard adage of like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you know, you'll never be happy, or something like that. As I've learned over the years, is that most advice that really resonates with me is actually just repackaged or like nicely worded version of one of these like really cliche adages. And I kind of start seeing them in a different light, and I'm like, huh, maybe the little tiles at the homeware store of Live, Love, Laugh were on to something. But in this book they really talk about the concept of stop trying to put square pegs into round holes, because you're just going to be pushing and you're just going to be trying really hard and it's never going to work. If you need to push and try really hard, you're doing something wrong. You need to kind of go with the flow. And how do you go with the flow? By going with your inner nature, with who you are on the inside. I'm probably explaining this in a very like not perfect to Taoism way, but that is kind of how I interpreted it from the book. And this is what I wrote down, the quotes that I liked. It says, everything has its own place and function. When you know and respect your inner nature, you know where you belong. And really importantly, you also know where you don't belong, which is something I'm really bad at. I'm definitely one of those people that is constantly trying to change who I am and trying to be like, if only I was more this, if only I was more that. And that causes me a lot of distress, as you can imagine. So I'm constantly trying to remind myself of this quote of like, if you respect your inner nature, you know where you belong, and you know where you don't belong. You know what you shouldn't be doing and where you shouldn't be putting your energy. And they also talk about how you need to rely on that inner nature. People are easily led away from what's right for them because people have brain and brain can be fooled. Wow. I love that. People have brain and brain can be fooled. Very true. Inner nature, when relied on, cannot be fooled. So the idea behind it is that if you just rely on your inner nature, everything will work out well, which is a kind of like spiritual idea that I'm not like super on board with, of this like just fully trusting, like if you just go with your inner nature, everything will be fine. I'm like, well, but there's like social political thing, blah, 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 blah. But it's one of those things where I'm like, it's a nice reminder to myself, you know? Not every piece of advice is like ultimate and universal. Sometimes pieces of advice are just nice reminders to yourself to give you a little peace of mind. And that brings me kind of to the next topic. Reading this again, I kind of understood a little bit more than usual why some people accuse this book of anti-intellectualism, because on this reread I really noticed that the author really goes very hard against like scientists and like people seeking knowledge. The author has this tendency to be like, well, when people use big words, it's just to sound smart and it's just to make things more confusing instead of using simpler words. And I'm always a bit like, well, sometimes the big words are just more nuanced and you kind of need them, especially in science. So I noticed myself kind of not really agreeing with the author's take on like science. But I will say, as someone who has been in the science field, has a whole master's degree, I do actually agree that like a lot of academic writing is confusing for absolutely no reason. Like it could really be written down in an easier way. It really could be written down in an easier way. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that sometimes certain advice works really well for some people, but it doesn't for other people. So I do agree that yes, sometimes people are in the scientific world are really using too difficult a language. I do agree with that, but I also, it always kind of grinds my gears when there's just people on the internet that use slightly bigger words than average because they just have a large vocabulary, and then they get accused of using difficult words on purpose to sound smart. And it's like, no, some people just talk like that. Some people really just talk like that. And this advice in this book of simplifying and not overly complexifying everything and not needing to be logical about everything all the time is really good advice to some people, like me. If you're someone who tends to overanalyze anything and just overthink everything, then yeah, this advice of like, hey, maybe be a little bit less in your thoughts sometimes, that's really good advice. But I understand that to other people, that sounds like anti-intellectualism, and they're like, so you want people to think less? It kind of reminds me of when the internet started sharing the common people pleaser advice of you don't owe anyone anything, which is really good advice for people who have a very hard time saying no to things, who always say yes to anyone that asks their help because they feel like they owe people their help, and it's really bad if they say no to those people. It's really good advice to be like, hey, you don't actually owe anyone anything. You can do people a favor, but you're not owed them a yes. And then the internet kind of took that, ran with it, the non-people pleasers got a hold of it, and suddenly people are using that advice to justify their own selfishness and just never helping anyone ever. I could talk about that for a very long time, but not today. There's not gonna be a video next week because I'm gonna be focusing on my moving vlogs, and also I'm gonna be moving. Oh, I still have so much to pack. All of this needs to go into boxes. As always, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon.